Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you. For the Honorable, the Head of Urban and Regional Planning Department of Diponegoro University, Professor Dr. Ingwi Wandari Handayani, STMT MPS, our speaker of the General Lecturer, Professor Carmona from School of Planning, University of College London. We are very happy to have you here. The head of undergraduate program in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning of Diponegoro University, Dr. Yudi Basuki STMT, the head of Laboratory of Physical and Spatial Design, Dr. Ingsanti Paula Dewi, our special invitees, Professor Dr. Iwan Rudiarto STMSC from Urban and Regional Planning Department, Diponegoro University, and the head of Architecture Department of Diponegoro University, Professor Dr. Insinyur Susana Ratisari, MMMA.
We would like to greet all the distinguished guests, all the lecturer and student of Urban and Regional Planning Department of Diponegoro University, all the lecturer and student of Architecture Department of Diponegoro University, and of course, all the participants. Let us introduce ourselves. First, my name is Ati Ifati.
And me, Kansa Savana. It's such an honor for us to be your master of ceremony of today. Welcome to the General Lecturer Series, Urban Design Government in Europe and the Softest of Soft Powers.
This topic is based on Professor Carmona's book, Urban Design Governments, which explores how urban design is managed across Europe, focusing on the influence of public authorities and stakeholders. It examines the use of non-regulatory tools and financial mechanisms to enhance design quality and the public interest, assessing their effectiveness and scope.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this General Lecturer Series, which will be conducted in hybrid format, allowing for both in-person and virtual participation by Zoom meeting.
Before we start this lecture, we would like to mention all the order of events for today. First, singing our national anthem, Indonesia Raya, and then opening speech from the head of the Urban and Regional Planning Department of Diponegoro University, and then souvenir handover and photo session, the general lecture from our speakers that will be hosted by our moderator, and the last one is closing.
Next on the agenda, we will sing our national anthem, Indonesia Raya, together. For all the audiences, please stand up and be ready to sing. For all the audiences, please get back to your seat. Next on the agenda, we will invite our head of Urban Regional and Planning Department to give a welcoming speech and officially open this event. For Professor Dr. Wibandari Handayani, time is yours.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak MC. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Good morning. Our honorable guest, Professor Matthew Carmona from the UCL London. It's really a great pleasure for me to welcome you here in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Diponegoro University. And also, please allow me to greet all of you here, our colleague from the Laboratory of Urban Design, Bu Santi, Bu Wati, Bu Retno Susanti, Bu Retno Wijayanti, Bu Novia, Bu Diah, Pak Grenis full team ya, minus Pak Musadun I think ya. I hope he will join. Thank you so much for for organizing this general lecture. And also, please allow me also to say hello to all my students here from the Urban and Regional Planning for the undergrad, and also maybe few from the postgrad programs, and also all the participants who join the session online and also offline here. Yeah, as on behalf of department, I think this is really a great moment for us to having your lecture offline here, Prof. Carmona. And I'm sure that we will talk about the urban design and governance is part of your expertise. So all of to our participants to lectures, Prof. Carmona is very famous scholars coming from the famous reputable university. So please take the opportunities to following all the presentations, and hopefully we can followed by a good discussion sessions. And even though the topic is about Europe, yeah, and I believe what we have here in Indonesia is a bit, or it's very different. We are in the global South country. We have informality, the urbanizations is coming in the different pace is very rapid here, but I believe some learn from Europe will be very fruitful to broadening your perspective in urban design. Just last night, I come up with an interesting fact, yeah, Prof. Carmona. You mentioned that your school, the Battery School of Planning, is the second oldest in UK. Yeah, and I think it's also a coincidence similarity because we are also the second oldest state university in Indonesia. Yeah, and you mentioned also your school is part of the biggest, one of the is even the biggest in UK, and I believe with 41 faculty members and almost 1,000 student body, also the biggest planning school. So I hope with these two similarities will lead us to strengthening the collaboration as well between the two institutions. Yeah, thank you again, Prof. And I hope once again, please allow me to ask all the participants here to take this good opportunity and take the most benefit from the guest lecture today. And thanks again for the Laboratory of Urban Design to organizing this general lecture. And sorry, I think I have to mention last but not least, I need to mention to you all that this is very important for us to have international exposure, to give international also experience to our students here, because part of the vision of the university to become one of the globally research university. So I think this is an important pathways for us to having such a kind of this event. Okay, thank you, and hope we can follow it up with the lectures after this. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for Professor Iwandari Handaini for the speech. Next agenda, because we will have a souvenir handover, and the souvenir handover will be delivered by Professor Iwandari Handayani to Professor Carmona.
Let's give a round of applause for Professor Matthew Carmona and Prof. Iwandari Handayani. And this is the second souvenir, Prof. It might be a simple souvenir, but we hope it will be very memorable for you. Thank you, Prof. Vivi and Prof. Carmona. And after this, we also have a photo session. So please, for Professor Carmona and Prof. Vivi, please join the audience in the theater. And the photos will be taken from the stage. And for all the audiences, please stand up. We will have a photo session together with the audience. And please join us in the theater. For all the audiences, please stand up because we will have a photo session together with the online participations. For the photographer, please take the photos from the stage. Okay, please everyone give the best smile for the photographer. Is ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Smile. Sudah, okay. Thank you. Saya. Right, now we're about to enter the lecture session, and the session will be hosted by our moderator, Dr. Ingwakidah Kurniawati, STMT. For Professor Wati, please join us on the stage.
So before the moderator take this session, let me introduce Mr. Wakidah Kurniawati first. Dr. Wakidah Kurniawati STMT is a senior lecturer in Urban and Regional Planning Department, Diponegoro University, Semarang. She had finished her Doctor of Urban and Regional Planning degree at TU Darmstadt, Germany, where her dissertation focused on urban equity in public space. Her research interests are inclusive urban design, heritage resilience, public space transformation and management, and urban villages and urban regeneration. So far, Mr. Wakidah Kurniawati has produced a lot of publication based on her interests I've mentioned before, such as measurement of thermal comfort in urban public space Semarang, climate-sensitive urban design in Pecinan area Semarang City, and so on. So please welcome Dr. Wakidah Kurniawati.
Maybe just a while, ya. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yeah, good day everyone. Good morning all. Thank you for the time. Thank you for all audience for having us today. I am Wahidah Kurniawati, will be the moderator on today's general lecture. I'm glad to see you here and welcome all of you to this general lecture on the topic of urban design governance in Europe and the status of soft powers. This general lecture is part of the Visiting Professor Program in a collaboration between the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Universitas Diponegoro, and University College London. This visiting professor program is one of the world-class university activities inviting foreign researchers and lecturers from partner universities. Ladies and gentlemen, all the students, we have a great speaker today. You are lucky. Yeah. Professor Matthew Carmona is very famous in urban design. Yeah. Professor Matthew from the Bartlett School of Planning, University College London. Maybe before we welcome Professor Carmona to give sharing today, I will read his curriculum vitae. Professor Carmona is an urban design professor at UCL Bartlett School of Planning. His research has focused on urban design governance process, and public space design, and also management. There are several famous books from Professor Carmona, such as Public Places, Urban Spaces, Urban Design Reader, Urban Design Governor, and etc. Yeah. Okay. Actually, in this lecturing, there are three three sessions. First, lecturing from you, 1 hour lecturing. Is it enough? 1 hour, and after that, there will be a discussion, question and answer from the offline and also the online participants, and after that, the conclusion. Yeah. Okay. Now, allow me to welcome the speaker, Professor Matthew Carmona, on urban design governance in Europe and the softest of soft power. Okay, Professor Carmona, the stage is yours. Yeah.
Do I need to use this?
Is it okay?
Yep.
You should like.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today. And thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to Wati, and thanks to the whole team here for making me feel so welcome. We had a lovely day yesterday, seeing the city. I hope my lecture lives up to the billing that you've given it. So I'll kick straight off. Urban design governance in Europe, the softest of soft powers. So I'm going to talk about research that has a very long gestation. I've been doing this a long time. In fact, the journey for me in terms of this research started right back in 1993, when I signed up to do a PhD after having finished my own master's. And I was very interested in what we then called design control, which is how the public sector controls the design of development, because a lot of the housing in particular that I was seeing in the UK was very poor quality. And my PhD and much of the research that I did in the first 10 years of my academic career has long been forgotten by everybody apart from me. But the ideas and interests that emerged in those early days of my career have sort of stayed with me, and the ideas continue to inform the research that I do today, including research that I'm going to talk about. And more recently, that research in this sort of area of urban design governance looked at a particular set of experiences that we had in the UK between the research was between 2013 and 2017, looking at an organization called CABE, which stands for the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment. Now that no longer exists, that organization, but it was very influential, and I spent some time studying its methods and its approaches that it used. And the definition of design governance that we used, and what my talk is going to focus on today, that we used in that research was this definition. So urban design governance is state-sanctioned intervention in the means and processes of designing the built environment in order to shape both those processes and outcomes in a defined public interest. So we do this, we do this activity all around the world in different ways. We have different processes, we have different tools, but essentially every system of planning engages in the governance of design. And hopefully they do that in the public interest. That's what it's all about. Now, this research that I did, the research related to CABE, that caught the eye of somebody who was working in UN Habitat more recently, a man called Frederick Saliers. And he asked whether I would be interested in doing some research with UN Habitat to take the work that we'd done in the UK and apply it to the whole of Europe, some of the thinking. And we joined together UCL with UN Habitat and an organization called BMA, which is the sort of, I suppose, the city architect of Brussels. And we joined together with them and we started the research that I'm going to talk about today in 2019. It finished in 2022. The project was called Urban Maestro. Very strange name. I don't quite know why it was called Urban Maestro, but it was. And we finished just last year with the launch of the book Urban Design Governance, and you can download that book freely. I'll give you a link at the end of the talk. So it's been a long journey for me, but if my personal research journey has been long, that's nothing compared with the length of the subject that I'm talking about, the provenance of the subject. Europe has a long history of urbanization, with the first cities dating back some 8,000 years to 6,000 BC. And whilst the formal means of decision making that shaped those early settlements, we don't know how that happened. It's very likely that from those earliest times, some form of control was enacted on where people could build and how people could build. In Europe, some of the earliest actually recorded controls were the reforms of someone called Solon the Lawgiver from around 600 BC in ancient Greece. And Solon the Lawgiver laid down a series of guidelines. He laid down guidelines on the spacing of houses and walls and ditches and wells and trees. Even beehives were controlled, spacing of beehives. Ancient Rome also had its regulations. many regulations, including some of the first ever aesthetic regulations. So, for example, they forbade the demolition of buildings in the countryside because they were worried about the aesthetic consequences of demolishing buildings and leaving big heaps of rubble everywhere in the countryside. The medieval world in Europe had its controls as well on what we now know as urban design. The first mayor of London, for example, in 1189, introduced what was called an assize on building to encourage construction with brick as a defense against fire, because London kept on burning down. But unfortunately, it didn't have much of an effect because people carried on building in timber. And of course, the Great Fire of London in 1666 burnt the whole city down again. But nevertheless, that fire in 1666 gave rise to the London Building Act of 1667. And it's that London Building Act that that directly resulted in the particular form and style of the part of London which UCL is based in, a part of London called Bloomsbury. And you can see here the types of houses that were created as a direct result of the regulation against the fire of London. So regulation can be powerful. During the 20th century and into the 21st centuries, new policy positions and regulations multiplied many, many times over, alongside a greater willingness to, and I suppose a greater expectation that the public sector should intervene in how the built environment is designed. And a case in point was zoning. Zoning had its origins in Napoleonic France. It was invented in Napoleonic France in the 19th century. Here's Napoleon with his iPad, with his zoning ordinance on his iPad. From Napoleonic France, it spread to Germany, and their zoning practices spread around the world, including to the United States, with all of their faults as well as their benefits. Today, a wide range of public interest motivations are apparent for why we choose to intervene in the design of new development. Lots of different motivations. And these diverse motivations have in various ways been written into public policy and into regulation through a multiple range of different governance regimes that impact on the built environment. It's not just planning. There's usually lots of different regimes of regulation that applies to the built environment. And they demonstrate that what is meant by design quality in any one place is not a narrow concern with aesthetics. We're not talking here about what places look like, although that might be part of the agenda. We're talking about a much broader agenda related to social, environmental, and economic, as well as health factors, and of course the physicality. All things that we might put together and talk about the place value, the value that a place gives us through the qualities that it has. Yet, as aspirations and regulations have grown and proliferated, so have criticisms, so have critiques of those regulations also proliferated. And while such critiques, such criticisms have fed the motivations and led to more regulation very often, Europe, in common with many other parts of the world, has predominantly been building urban areas that in many ways are profoundly unsustainable. And that social attitude surveys suggest are often disliked by European citizens. They often don't like the sort of places that we've been building for decades. And this is locked into how urban areas are shaped with interlinked systems of investment and knowledge and regulation, producing patterns of development that we can't easily change. American scholars have argued that almost every aspect of the built environment is shaped in some way or other by regulation. But too often these regulations are very limited in their scope. They're technical in their aspiration, and they're not generated out of any place-based vision of what good places might be. In Rome, for example, despite 2,000 years of experience of regulating design, new residential areas like this can be built without regard to character or quality. Despite the fact that there are lots of regulations and a general urban development plan and comprehensive standards to try and shape those places, shape the design of those places, but still we're creating places that people don't generally love, people don't particularly like. They're not great places that are being designed. But there's clearly also a balance to be struck. There are circumstances where just very clear and simple, even what you might call quite crude rules, can have a huge and beneficial impact. The negative reaction in the 1970s to the building of the 59-story Montparnasse Tower, which you can see on the skyline here in Paris, gave rise to a regulation that imposed a limit of 37 meters across the whole of central Paris. No building could be built above 37 meters as a reaction to that. And it was very effective as a regulation. And it stopped tall buildings through much of central Paris. But equally, there are examples of seemingly sophisticated places with incredibly sophisticated sets of rules and regulations that still produce places which have very little character and very little quality. Copenhagen, for example, is a city well known for its very careful engagement with design quality. But still, places are produced like this, which, despite the best of intentions, are often a bit dull, a bit sterile, a bit desolate, perhaps. We also need to remember that the public sector is just one actor in how European cities, in how any city is shaped. As top-down and hierarchical forms of post-war government increasingly have given way to market-led networked governance, types of governance, a key feature of the neoliberal state has been a reduction of the direct power that the public sector has to control development. Often that direct power has been replaced by a more diffuse sort of power, a more indirect type of power, and means to secure public interests. The public sector has to work with lots of different actors to ensure that it meets its objectives. So if previously government had the decisive role, then now decision-making in Europe is often negotiated and shared between key public and private actors. So the public sector doesn't have all the power. It's shared between public and private actors. With the exact balance of power between parties endlessly shifting from development to development, No development, no two developments are ever exactly the same. And from place to place and through time, the way the power works shifts through time. And this is fundamental because if the public sector can sufficiently shape the decision-making environment within which decisions on development are made, then without actually designing anything itself, it may be possible to secure design outcomes that meet all of its public sector aspirations. In other words, it has to work within that diffuse, shifting set of power relations, and it has to try and mold them so that the public sector can meet its own objectives by working with others. Yet, as international experiences repeatedly demonstrate, this does not occur through regulation alone. Instead, it requires the construction of a system of urban design governance with the achievement of holistic design quality at its heart. In other words, what we need is a culture of quality, a culture of delivering high quality development. Now, all this introduction forms the backdrop to the Urban Maestro study that I mentioned earlier, and which is the basis of the talk today. And the Urban Maestro study was fundamentally concerned with tracing and understanding non-regulatory means of engaging in the design of the built environment. Or as our strapline, the strapline of the project said, we were looking at new governance strategies for urban design. From the start, the project was generally collaborative between ourselves at UCL, between UN Habitat and colleagues at BMA. These were all the colleagues involved in the research. It spanned a tumultuous period. The first year of the project was lovely. We had lots of meetings on site, sometimes in the rain, like here, this was in Lisbon, and we had lots of personal meetings face-to-face around tables discussing the project. And the second year was like this, everybody online, because COVID struck and we could no longer meet. But we carried on with the project the best that we possibly could. In academic terms, Urban Maestro was a piece of qualitative, cross-national comparative research and learning. So it was cross-national. We were working across boundaries throughout Europe. It was primarily a qualitative piece of research. It had used five approaches, five methods. First of all, we started by using the earlier UK-based study on CABE, the Commission for Architecture of the Built Environment, and we developed a typology. And that in turn gave us a sort of analytical framework, a set of ideas against which to structure our research. This then structured a Europe-wide survey. We did a survey across governments throughout Europe, all the different countries we surveyed to try and understand what were their processes of urban design governance. Then we developed, partly as a result of that survey, but partly as a result of just talking to people and online searches, a panorama of interesting practices, case studies of urban design governance from across Europe. We tried to build up this panorama of different practices from all around Europe. And then the next, and from that we developed some in more detail as a series of case studies. And then the really important bit was a series of discussions that we had all around Europe and online as well, particularly in the second year, with practitioner audiences from everywhere. And that was the qualitative bit of the research, the really informative bit of the research. And that all eventually fed into the creation of the book. Now, the conceptual basis, the framework, the intellectual framework that we developed is summarized in this rather complicated looking diagram. I'm not going to talk through this diagram, you'll be glad to know. But the most important bit is what was actually reflected in the book, in the subtitle of the book, that we were interested in soft powers of government rather than the hard regulatory powers, alternative means of engaging in design quality. I'll say more about that in a second. As the exercise of government has become ever more multi-layered, ever more complex, governments have had to familiarize themselves with a whole range, I suppose, of different powers and different tools to try and influence how the built environment is shaped. These range from what we might call the soft powers or the carrots, these sort of, rather than the aspirations of government, these represent as well as the soft powers, I should have mentioned also there's hard powers, which we can call the stick. So the carrots and the sticks. And together, these two types of powers represent a sort of series of aspirations and tools and approaches. Don't worry about, you won't be able to read all the detail. You don't need to read the detail here. That's not important. All it's illustrating is that there are lots of different ways, lots of different tools and approaches that governments have to try and influence change in the built environment. But increasingly in recent years, there's been a move from these hard powers, from the sticks, to the softer powers, to the carrots, and an increasing use of those softer types of approaches to try and influence change. And that's what we wanted to capture. The different governance regimes that impact on the built environment and that shape the built environment rely on different combinations of these hard and soft powers and formal and informal types of tools. And the qualities of tools that result are often quite contrasting from those formal and informal tools. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. So the formal tools are typically favored by governments because they are enforceable. And notionally, they're democratic as well, because governments are elected and then they use their regulatory powers. But the problem with them is they're very time consuming and they're usually quite inflexible types of tools. So across Europe and elsewhere, these more network systems of governance that have developed have tended to usher in tools of urban design governance that are softer, are more about educating, encouraging, nudging different stakeholders to better outcomes rather than forcing them. And these were the particular focus of the Urban Maestro project, those softer, flexible, discretionary tools that can also often be prepared quite quickly. To help us in the project to understand the range of tools available and their relationships, we developed a European-wide typology, which was the starting point for our work. And this distinguished different features of these tools. First, some tools focus primarily on building a culture within which design quality can be prioritized. They only indirectly shape the processes of design. It's all about the broad culture. Other tools, by contrast, concentrate on directly delivering or directly shaping actual projects and outcomes. We could call these delivery tools. So we have culture quality tools and we have quality delivery tools. Second, while the most widely used tools are often quite formal, quite regulatory in nature, directly directing, if you like, decision-making processes. We also have those soft, informal tools as well, from broad culture-changing tools to tools that also influence particular projects. And when we consider these categories together, then we can identify different types of tools. So 4 categories we can identify: what we can call informal quality culture tools, things like design award schemes. I'll say more about this, is just introducing the types. I'll give you some illustrations in a moment about what I mean. Then what we call informal quality delivery tools, something like design competitions might be part of that category. Then formal quality delivery tools, something like the use of design codes or standards. And then a final category, formal quality culture tools, although we couldn't find anything in that category. So we ended up with just 3 main categories of types of tool, which are reflected in this diagram. There's 3 different big categories, and those distinguish 9 different types of tool that we found used across Europe. Although the divisions between the categories, it's a diagram, so the divisions are not hard and fast. There's some flexibility. Broadly, however, within each of those categories, there is a relationship between tools that are more passive and those that are more active in terms of their intervention. So they vary between more passive and more active types of tools. And as I say, I'll provide some examples of that in a moment. But before I do that, before I provide some examples of these different types of tools, we need to consider the broader context for the governance of design and how that varies, often quite dramatically from place to place, even in the same country, how the context can change a lot. And this idea was captured in the project through the notion of urban design governance landscapes. Because any locality, any particular place, is likely to be subject to a series of overlapping governance regimes, depending on where you are and with who the competencies lie. So, for example, local government, municipalities, each have their own processes and networks of powers, what you might call the districts here. So this is where I live in London, in Greenwich, and that's my district. And they have a series of powers. They have a series of policies and tools for influencing design. But overlaying that layer, there's another layer, which is the London-wide scale. And there's another whole series of competencies there. In London, we have a mayor, and that mayor also has a series of tools and policies. I'll illustrate this in a moment. And then overlaying that is England. And government ministers in England have their own series of policies and their own series of tools and approaches. So we have these different layers of governance, each with different approaches and different tools that they use to try and influence design and create a culture in which design quality can be delivered. To illustrate this in the book, we looked at 3 case studies, 3 big case studies, Lisbon, Vienna, and London. And as it's where I live, I thought I'd just illustrate to you what I mean through just looking in a little bit more detail at London and some of the tools that we have available in London across these different layers of governance. So in London, the first layer would be the national level from England down. And this is a level which over the decades, the influence of design quality has sometimes been strong and sometimes it's seen as unimportant. So sometimes important, sometimes unimportant. Ministers at the national level set down policy. They have this document called the National Policy, the National Planning Policy Framework is the most important policy document, and that talks about design quality. But ministers also produce a whole series of different types of guidance, which is more detailed guidance for the local districts to influence the local districts and to try and influence their agenda nationally. At the national level, they also have different organizations with a particular remit that impacts on design quality. So, for example, we have a national agency that's responsible for producing social housing, and they use a tool called Building for Life, which is a sort of measure. They use it to measure the quality of different schemes that they give money to. And they've set up also recently an organization called the Office for Place. And the Office for Place runs a series of educational programs, for example, on design quality around the country. And then at the London-wide scale, the mayor also then produces policy. The mayor produces the London Plan, and that has a whole chapter that deals with design quality. And the London mayor also produces guidance. This is one example, that the use of design codes on small sites. The London mayor is in charge of an organisation called Transport for London, which is the Transport Authority for London, and that has incredible power in terms of how the streets and the spaces of the city are created and how they are laid out and the quality of pavements and so forth. And they use a series of tools to measure their impact and to measure quality. Every street in London, for example, has a particular set of specifications that it needs to meet. The mayor also has appointed a series of design advocates who run a sort of design review system. So big projects, big important projects go to the design advocates and they can say whether it's a good quality scheme or not. The mayor funds an organization called Urban Design London, which runs a series of training programs for local authorities across the city. And then at the local scale, at the district scale, all the districts, they have their own systems and tools and policy and so forth. For example, Camden, where my university is based, runs a design awards system, a design awards scheme to give prizes to the best developments in a particular year. And they also produce development themselves. They create new housing, social housing, and they're involved in regeneration projects. So there's all these different layers, if you like, that are all potentially work together, or sometimes they don't work together. Sometimes they work in opposition to each other. At the local level, you have design review panels as well, more design review panels. And all of these different layers have meant that London has quite a sophisticated system of urban design governance that sometimes works well. And in fact, in some analysis that we did in the Place Alliance that I'll talk about in a bit, we identified that London had the highest quality development in the country because of these different layers of governance and the way that they were working together, whereas other parts of the country don't have such a sophisticated system and therefore are not producing very good quality development very often. So even in London, with its all of those different layers and different tools, we still produce some pretty horrible development sometimes, unfortunately. Even the most sophisticated processes are no guarantee of success. So the three urban design governance landscapes featured in the book are just three of many thousands that we could have chosen to look at from across Europe. Every place, every city, every municipality is a different context, a different system of relationships. Nevertheless, the chosen cities, those three that we looked at, had in common that each were in different ways trying to prioritize design quality. Each of them were considering that design quality was an important factor that they wanted to influence to different degrees and using different tools. With some success, each of those three had considerable success. But what is clear, I think, and what was very clear about those case studies, is that a strong national commitment to design quality seems to be fundamental. This is, that commitment at the national level is critical to boosting local ambition, setting that ambition at the citywide scale and the district scale, and ensuring that those different layers work together. At the same time, no matter how ambitious the national government, ultimately most of the delivery is at the local level. So we need to have commitment at that local level as well. Now, all this complexity implies that understanding the collective European urban design governance landscape was a very challenging task, which is why, in fact, in the project Urban Maestro, and there's a website available that you can look at. We decided to focus on the particular types of tools that were being used rather than trying to map all of the complexity across Europe. And the book dives into the resulting collective toolbox in some detail. The full panorama of approaches and practices that we identified is explored, as I say, on the website. And there's over 100 different practices on there. And if you're interested in different practices, different good in the main good practices, then you can go to the website and have a look at those and look. They're classified underneath the different types of tools, and you can see how they relate and how they might relate to practices here or elsewhere. While the book focuses on 100 different initiatives, so the website focuses on 100 different initiatives, the book selected 27 of those. You don't need to read that. Of 27 of the most interesting practices and the most influential practices, all part of these informal categories of urban design governance using these softer powers. And I'm going to just illustrate one of those through the work of the Place Alliance. So this is just one initiative that I want to focus on to illustrate these soft powers in action. And I'm focusing on this one because it's a case study that I know particularly well. The Place Alliance is an organization that I set up back in the UK. And it uses a series of, or it has used a series of very soft powers, the softest of soft powers, you might say, through a combination of persuasion, information, and analysis tools. Those are the tools that the Place Alliance has used: persuasion, information, and analysis. So let me just illustrate what I mean by that. Illustrate some of these soft tools through this example. So the story of the Place Alliance also begins a long time ago, a long time before the Place Alliance itself was invented, and it reflects a characteristic of British urban policy, which over the years swings wildly from being very positive about design quality and seeing that government has an important role in helping to deliver design quality, to being very negative about design quality. And it swings depending on who the politicians are at any one time. And the national politicians have a big influence in establishing that national framework. And often that's down to the character of the politicians as much as anything else, or whether they think these things are important or not. I first became aware of this when I was studying to be an architect in the 1980s. And at that time, everything relating to the design was considered to be subjective. And the idea was that government shouldn't be involved in design quality because it was all subjective. It was all about aesthetics. That was the view. But in the 1990s, when I was studying planning, the then Prince Charles, now King Charles, started to become very interested in these issues. And his interest sparked a national debate. We had a national debate on these issues back in the sort of 1990s. And from that debate, government started to get interested in these issues. And for the first time it was about 1994, urban design as a term was used in national policy. Until that point, urban design hadn't been used. And the interest in government increased through the 2000s, and the organization that I mentioned, CABE, the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, that was created, and that was a very influential organization for about 10 years. Then we had austerity, which hit in 2008 to 2010. And suddenly government said that they weren't interested anymore because we couldn't afford to be interested. They took all the money away. And local authorities were reduced in size, and they got rid of all their designers, and suddenly, there was no interest in design. And there was a little bit of following that period when all the money was removed. Gradually, the infrastructure started to build back again, but there was a gap. There was a leadership gap in the country. Government weren't interested in design quality. Local authorities didn't have the capacity. But there was a lot of people like myself and others who were interested and thought that this was an important issue. So we set up the Place Alliance as a sort of bridge from where we were to where we wanted to be. We wanted to be in a place where these things were considered important once more. And because we were doing research at that time on CABE, the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, we identified that many of the tools that they'd used were tools that we could use in the Place Alliance, particularly these soft tools of persuasion, information, and analysis. And so we set up the Place Alliance with UCL taking the lead. And as I say, the work and the influence and the tools of CABE were very influential on us at that time. And we used a whole series of tools over the years, tools that started from the broad category of persuasion. So initially, for example, we hosted a series of meetings, just big cross-sector meetings at UCL. We called these the big meets, to build a series of alliances. We wanted to build an alliance across all the different built environment disciplines that were interested in design quality. So we held 10 big meets at UCL, just huge meetings. We had a tent, and we had all of these people in the tent that got together to discuss the importance of design quality. And from those big meets, we launched a series of campaigns to try and persuade government, but try and also persuade people in the industry that this was an important agenda. One of the most important campaigns was that we said that we wanted a national organization with a remit for design quality. And in fact, that was very influential, that particular campaign, because one was set up, the Office for Place was set up recently and has just begun operating. So campaigning was an important part of our work, persuading politicians in particular. And the office place, as I said, was set up. As a university, we were very familiar with using information as a tool to try and persuade others as well. And CABE had used a lot of online resources, had a lot of case studies, for example, that they published for different successful developments. We couldn't afford to do that because we didn't have any money. They when they were around, they had lots of money, but we had very little. Through our various pieces of research and through just small collaborations, we began to build a series of online resources. One of them, for example, is the Place Value Wiki that brings together evidence about the quality of places and the value they add in economic and social and environmental terms. So we produced that resource, for example. We also recently have been developing a series of case studies. One of our latest projects, for example, a research project, is looking at low value areas and how you can achieve design quality in places that are disadvantaged, the most disadvantaged places. Can you achieve design quality in those places? It's very difficult to do, but there are ways and means of doing that. And we're going to be publishing soon a series of case studies on that. We've offered specialist training over the years. For example, we had a series of urban design summer schools, inviting professionals to UCL to learn about urban design and learn about the importance of urban design, because when austerity struck, many local authorities, many districts got rid of their urban designers, and they had planners there who didn't know much about design. So there was a need for training, if you like. And then we used analysis. Again, as a university, we were very comfortable with the use of analysis tools. We used research. We did a lot of research, which informed our campaigns and informed our alliance building and informed the online resources and the case studies. A whole series of projects. These are meant to be balloons, by the way. We did a project on skills and capacity in local authorities, a research project on skills and capacity. We did one on local politics and what local politicians felt about design quality and the influence that local politicians could have. We did a project looking at design review, this sort of process of peer reviewing development projects. We did a research project on place value, and that was it became quite an important academic project as well. We did a project that looked on people's experience of COVID and living in their homes, being locked down in their homes, and how different types of homes gave a better or a worse experience for those people during COVID. We did a project that looked at the range of different tools available to local authorities in particular, and how they could use those tools of urban design governance more successfully. And we did an audit that I already mentioned in relation to London. We did an audit of schemes right across the UK. This was one of our most influential projects, a housing design quality audit, where we looked at 142 large-scale housing projects and we analysed them for their quality as a way of influencing the developers and government. And gradually, government have been persuaded, and some of our most recent research has shown that there has been a change of attitude. Government has started to produce policy again that's been more positive about design. They've started to produce guidance again after getting rid of all of their previous design guidance. And we have monitored this, and one of our most recent projects, in fact, has looked at how government decision on design has reflected this agenda and has identified that, in fact, the success of design appeals, we have a system of design appeals, which I won't explain now, but it's an indicator of how important design is regarded within the national government. And increasingly government has become interested in design quality again, which is a very positive thing. So there's been a ray of light. It's not perfect. There's a long way to go. But gradually, from being at a very low ebb where design was totally off the national agenda, gradually it's come back again. And our work has been part and parcel of helping to build that new interest in design quality. So what does the Place Alliance case show? Well, I think the initiative shows how, in a very networked, shifting and diffuse governance landscape, even non-government and non-market actors can play a decisive role in shaping national and local decision-making environments on design, particularly universities, I would say. Universities, I think, have an important role in this sphere to influence others, influence agendas. And we did that through informing decisions by injecting evidence. A lot of that research we did was evidence that we were injecting into the discussion. By challenging and holding decision makers to account when nobody else was doing that. By coordinating and amplifying fragmented voices. In the UK, the built environment is divided into lots of different professions and lots of different organizations that want to influence, but are very fragmented. And we help to coordinate those different voices. We did it by providing a neutral space. Universities, I think, are neutral spaces that empowers different actors to speak and to speak up and say that something's important. Also by helping to lead when there was no national leadership at that time. And if you're interested about anything I've said on the Place Alliance, then there's a website, placealliance.org.uk, that you can go and you can look at some of the research that we've done and some of the different approaches. The Urban Maestro project, of course, explored many more initiatives than just the Place Alliance around Europe, including those that went from formal to informal tools. Place Alliance just used informal tools. And tools that were about building a culture, as well as tools that were about delivering. In total, we identified 24 different categories of soft urban design governance tools, as well as different financial mechanisms that we can tie to those design governance tools. Because finance, how projects are financed, the economics of projects is fundamental. You need to be able to tie the economics to the design quality ambitions. The aim was both to interrogate the tools, but more importantly, to consider the collective benefits or the collective lessons that might be drawn from their use. And the results of these discussions are summarized in the book. At the end of the book, there's 20 propositions, including the vital question of, can practices travel? How do practices travel? Can the sort of practices that I've been talking about in one part of Europe travel to a different part of Europe? Can they travel from Europe to Indonesia or elsewhere, and the other way around as well? So do these practices travel? That was a key question that we asked. And as I noted at the start of this presentation, urban design governance under a different name has been around for a long time in Europe. Not always successfully, but it's been around for a long time. And whilst the Urban Maestro workshops revealed an obvious strong desire to learn from each other and to share experiences, I think the sheer complexity of practices that vary from place to place and through time often remains a barrier. But that barrier is largest when it comes to those hard regulatory tools. It's difficult to shift one legal system or one regulatory process from one country to another. But the soft tools, in fact, travel very well because they work without regulation. So we can learn a lot from other countries, how other countries use those soft tools and those informal powers. And we can import those practices from one country to another very easily because they often don't require regulation at all. And they help to build our ambition and our drive to deliver a culture of quality. Particularly when we use them together in combination, using those different types of tools together in combinations is the most powerful way of building that culture of development, that culture of design quality. And it's places that have that culture of design quality that can sustain it over time. So to conclude, soft power and hard power tools are not the same. Soft power tools require us to think differently about urban problems, including the design of places. So instead of requiring action, such powers are about nudging stakeholders, gently nudging stakeholders in the right direction through influencing, through convincing, even seducing them into action. This can limit their impact as ultimately these soft powers don't determine final actions. They can't force anybody to do anything. But if we use those soft powers well, they can change those long-term cultures and practices. And they have the potential for far greater impact on the quality of places than many formal regulations often do. If you're interested in finding out more, you can download the book free from the UCL Press website, or you can use that QR code to download the book free. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I made some sense, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Microphone. Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe give the big applause again to Prof. Carmona. Yeah, thank you, Prof. Carmona. It was such an informative and exciting presentation. Yeah, I think. Yeah. Actually, we are now in the second session. It is time to you. You can ask, maybe make several confirmation about urban design governance. Yeah. Okay. From the offline student first. Yeah. From the URP students, maybe. Yeah, okay. There are two questions. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can.
Okay, good morning. Okay, good morning. Okay, my name is Willy from Urban and Regional Planning, sir, master student. I would like to ask a question about, so you say that persuasion is one of the softest factor to change how the government finally nudging the government to creator of the design. So I would like to ask, is this possible in developing countries like Indonesia? Because the term of persuasion is about persuade the politicians. The politicians in many developing countries think that this is not the this is not the important, because many politicians will think that this is for the long term, and politicians will only have maybe 10 years. So this, why don't we just build monument or a statue that will not generate economic growth, but it will make the name of politician remembered. So is it possible to, in foreign countries, this persuasion can be enhanced and not using like the formal powers? Okay, that's my question. Thank you, sir.
Should I answer that question first? Oh, yes, I'll answer. Yeah, that'd be good, I think. Because I'm dyslexic and I can't remember more than one question at a time, unfortunately. I think it's a very good question. Politicians are the same everywhere. I don't think it's different in European countries to here, really. Yes, politicians have different preoccupations. But ultimately, you know, why do politicians go into politics? Well, most of them would tell us anyway that they go into it for the benefit of society. They want to have a positive influence. Some, yes, go into it just because they want to be remembered. And maybe those are the ones that build themselves monuments. Those monuments get pulled down eventually. You know, to build themselves a real legacy, if they can improve the quality of life of people, then that's a real tangible legacy, and they're more likely to be elected. But you're right, it does take time. And so in some senses, it's harder if the political system is unstable, you know, if constantly it's moving from one political party to another. Having that consistency often helps. In London, for example, we've had reasonably consistent mayor for the last 15 years or so, and that's helped, I think, to build a sort of stability in the system. But, you know, I think, you know, this room is full of young people, and you've all got a voice, and you're all here learning about what is important when it comes to how we shape the built environment. And you will go out there and your voices should be persuasive. And if you think it's important, you will be advising politicians. And it needs to start somewhere. This is not achieved overnight. Some of the examples that I use, a city like Copenhagen, for example, today has a reputation for being a very high quality place with a high quality of life, delivered through this concern for design quality. But that's taken 40 years to deliver it. Gradual building, and it was academics who were behind that, who started off persuading particular politicians who have long gone that this was important and it was worth investing in. And those politicians who believed them are now remembered. So, yeah, it may be a longer legacy than a monument.
Yeah, the second question, you can introduce yourself first. Yeah.
Hello, Professor. My name is Faiz. I'm the master student of this department, and I would like to ask you about the material of the stack triangle, the urban design governance, and the pointers there. Since our mother language is not English and I may skip the information, I would like to confirm that there is no consequences or a punishment or the law enforcement about the designing the urban planning. Do we, as the urban designer or urban planner, don't have the authorities, or maybe the incentive things, the support things, the grant things is the main factors that can lead the plan to be realized? That may be my question only. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't want to give the wrong impression that it's all about these soft powers. It's not. Soft powers and hard powers work together. In the best places, they work together. And ultimately, you know, planners, for example, they need to have the authority to ultimately say, no, that's not good enough. We want something that's better. You can't develop here because it's not good enough what you're proposing. And planners need to have that ability to say no, ultimately. But hopefully they won't need to use that power very often, because if they can use the softer tools and they can put in place more sophisticated guidance to encourage and to support and show the right direction, then maybe they won't have to use those hard power tools, because, you know, developers will be doing the right things to start off with. So it's about making these things work together. And it depends where you are in, you know, if you think about every city or maybe every country, it's on a continuum, and some are right at the start of that continuum, all these issues that I've talked about are not really on the agenda, and you need to start by building that slowly. And others are at the other end of the continuum, and they're doing all of this already, and they're doing it really well. So you need to decide where you are and what you need to do as a result of where you are on that continuum. The example that I showed you, the Place Alliance, we were at, you know, when we started, we were at a time when national government wasn't interested at all in these issues. And so we started to use those soft tools to persuade government. And since then, they've altered their policy, which relates to the harder powers and the sort of regulatory authority that planners have locally. So ultimately, the two work together.
We still have time. Maybe there is another question. Yeah, okay, please.
Okay, sir. I am Hamzah from Smart City Concentration. I want to ask about, we know that in Smart City, the people has a big portion in developing Smart City in the city. But in our country, in Indonesia, it is difficult to find that the government focusing developing the people. Instead, they just build infrastructure in real. I mean, people is not the priority, but as the first question from Mas Willy, that the government mostly build something monument, and then why Europe, some city in Europe, Brazil apa sih? Success in applying smart city or urban design, but some country in developing country, they hard to realize the theory to be applied in real life. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think it raises a very interesting issue, and it comes back to this idea of the built environment. When we think about the built environment, when we think about cities, we're dealing with wicked problems. Have you heard that expression, wicked problems? Wicked problems means problems that are so complicated that we almost want to ignore them because they're too complicated to deal with. And so it's easy for governments to say, right, well, we're going to ignore all those problems to do with the city, and we're going to build over there on that bit of green land because that's easy to do. We know how to do that, and we're perhaps creating a monument for ourselves. But the real challenges of the city are not those one-off big developments, but they're the whole city, the rest of the city. And, you know, if a politician really wants to build a legacy, then that's what they need to deal with. But it's not easy, and you need to think about where you're going to start. So we visited a very interesting place yesterday. What was the name of the fishing village that we went to?
Amba Loro.
It was fascinating. And, you know, they've got, clearly there are lots of issues, lots of problems that community is dealing with. You know, I can't remember, somebody asked me, where would you start? And I said, well, let's start, you'd start with the rubbish. The simple, straightforward problem of how do you deal with the trash, the rubbish, which is all there and which is not being taken away. So somebody said to me that it's cheaper for them just to dump it than it is to have it taken away. But that has big health implications and big implications to do with the quality of the life of people living there. And so if you start with one problem and then you gradually think about, you know, what's next, then maybe you can turn a place like that around, doing a series of small things and not all at once and saying, right, well, maybe it will take us 20 years, but nevertheless, you know, we've got a vision where we want to go. So yeah, it's complex, and that's what we mean by wicked problems. But I think good politicians and good professionals try and tackle those wicked problems, because those are the most important problems for us to deal with.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe from the online participant, is there any question, Mas Amin? No? Okay. To the online participant, actually, you can write the question directly in the chat, or maybe you can raise your hand if you want to ask directly to Professor Carmona. Okay. Maybe from the Urban Design Studio. Yeah. Is there any student want to ask something? Yeah. Okay, Dalva.
Yeah, okay. Good morning. My name is Davan Noval from the Urban Regional Planning for undergraduate students. But as you said earlier, then we, the youth, must take an action for but to the governments. And what can we do as youths to convince the governments to do some things good for people, such as making good public places? And have you experienced the youth or student movement for making the government listens to what people want in Europe or maybe somewhere else? And actually that the governments want to make something good for people, like such of that thing. Thank you.
So was your question, how can the students influence?
Yes, what can we do for the governments and governments will listen to us?
I think, you know, students in universities can be in a very powerful position because there's a lot of you, because you have the time to reflect and try things out, to experiment. For example, at UCL, some of our students are involved in local community groups, and we have a module that deals with engagement between the students and those community groups. And the students work with the community groups to help those community groups establish a vision for their place that they can then advocate to politicians, because a lot of those communities don't know where to start. And students can help them with that, because they can't afford to employ professionals. but students are there as part of their training, part of their learning, can work directly with communities and help them with that. And that can be a very powerful way, I think, of influencing. But also, you're here in the middle of a big campus with lots of spaces that you could transform through, your actions, through what you do. You could take them as live projects, from painting on the streets to, whatever you might decide to do, or you could go and work with particular communities and spend a day or a week or something. So you can do live experiments as well. And then hopefully when you finish, you'll all be, powerful voices, powerful professional voices. And, those professional voices change through time. I think the young people now who are through universities are very much more engaged with things like sustainability and climate change and so forth. And for older professionals, it's that they don't necessarily, well, they understand the issues, but they think, well, again, it's too complicated to do anything about. But I think the enthusiasm that comes through with the younger generations can really help in pushing that agenda forward once they come into the job market. So I think there's lots of ways that you could be influential, and I think the university as a whole can be a powerful voice for change. Universities are incredibly important to cities, academics are usually people that are listened to. So that's another powerful way that the university can impact.
Okay. And all the ladies.
Okay, my name is Muhammad Rifocai Firmansyah. I'm from undergraduate program from Urban and Regional Planning. From the presentation, you say that we can divide the tools of design governance in two key ways. The first is quality culture and quality delivery tools, and also formal and informal tools. So, I want to ask, how do informal quality culture tools contribute to shaping the built environment compared to formal quality delivery tools? And can you give examples of how both are applied in real world scenarios? And then I have the second question. In case where informal and formal tools overlap in application, how do policymakers decide which tools should take precedence? Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is a very complicated one, and I'll refer you to my book. Because, yeah, there are lots of different tools in each of those categories. Those are just sort of broad categorizations, and they're not hard and fast. It's not like rigidly one is here and another one is there. It depends exactly on how they've been put together. But if you are interested in how they might work together and the differences, then do have a look at the book, because it explains and it gives lots of examples of each of the different types of tools. So that's probably the best thing to do. What was your second question? I told you I can never remember more than one question at a time.
The second question is, in case where informal and formal tools overlap in application, how do policymakers decide which tool should take precedence?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Often policymakers and politicians tend to look to the formal tools because that's what they're used to dealing with, and that's what the legislation is there. And they think, yeah, we'll use those tools, and they can be very powerful and they're important tools. But I think those informal, those softer powers, which are often forgotten about, can be equally powerful if used well. And sometimes it's about professionals reminding politicians and others that you don't have to always regulate. You can try and persuade, or you can produce evidence that will show a particular direction is the right direction to go in. And it's about, I think, professionals understanding the range of tools at their disposal and when to use each, but it will vary depending on the circumstances. So I don't have a sort of answer that says, you should always use this one in this circumstance or that one in that circumstance. Usually they work together. They work best together, I would say. I hope that was clear.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, sir. My name is Livia from the Master Student of Urban and Regional Planning. I want to ask from the point of view of the people, I want to ask from the cases that you have, like the 27 cases that you mentioned earlier, is there any general characteristics of the people, like maybe their income level or their educational background? Because in Indonesia, there very high disparity between people in one city. Like there is a lower income people and lower educational background in the slums area, while there are also like gated communities which have a very high income, and how and the two of them are the most maybe hardest to persuade from the government side. So is there any cases like that in your book, and how and what type of tools that used to persuade both of them? Thank you.
Well, I wouldn't worry about the people in the gated communities. They can worry about themselves. I think, but yes, I think people in very disadvantaged areas are sometimes very difficult to reach, and it needs particular sets of skills that some professionals have and others don't. And it's about building that trust over time, rather than sort of coming in and trying to impose a plan, an already prepared plan. It's about saying to those communities, what are the problems? What are the opportunities as you understand it? What would that suggest in terms of, different design development options that will be of benefit to the community? So building that trust over time with the community, I think, is very important. I very briefly mentioned it. We're doing a project just about to finish, actually, and we've been looking at disadvantaged communities around the UK and about how you could achieve design quality in those locations, because typically in the UK, design quality goes out of the window when people say, right, well, the economy won't support it. But what you find, in fact, is that, it doesn't cost more to deliver good quality development than poor quality development. And in fact, I'd say a lot of those gated communities are poor quality development because they're not connected into the city properly. So it doesn't necessarily cost more, but we just need to understand the complex social and economic dynamics and what's important to those people. So the place that we went to yesterday, the fishermen and their families very much wanted to stay in that location despite the problems. So that becomes the starting point. What do you do given that? The first answer is not to move them away, but to work with the existing and to work with them. But that takes time and building trust, I think.
We have, what is, 2 questions. Oh, you can read directly. Yeah. From Anto and from Dea.
Yeah. So it says, I'm Anto from Triaski University. Nowadays, you might be in the near future to come. I'd like to have your opinion about how to relate this urban design governance in order to achieve the sustainable development goals. That's a good question. Again, you're full of really difficult questions. Yeah, so one of our partners was UN Habitat, where the Sustainable Development Goals originated from the UN. And it wasn't something that we directly considered, although one of the case studies that we include, one of those, I can't remember, it was one of the 27, one of the 100 on the website, was a piece of guidance in, I'm trying to think where it was now. It was in the Netherlands, I think, which directly related design quality to the SDGs. And was a piece of guidance that all local authorities in the country were required to use with that direct link. I find that the SDGs, it depends where you are. In some countries in Europe, they're taken very, they're regarded as very important and very much at the forefront of the agenda. And others, they're virtually not on the agenda at all. In the UK, people never talk about the SDGs, for example. But some parts of Europe, they do. And they're very, every effort is made to relate policy and guidance to those SDGs. So I don't know whether that answers the question or not. And then there's a second question here from D. Aside from politicians in Indonesia, who hold the most authority are from private developers. As their new towns become the national strategic projects, I think this could lead to regulation changes based on private developers' interests. How urban governance react to this issue? Yeah, so this comes back to this relationship between public and private. And I think a good system is one that doesn't, it wants to harness that innovation and that entrepreneurship and the resources of the private sector, but it wants to shape those resources. It wants to shape them in a positive way. And that's the public sector's role. And it's about working together in partnership. So the project that I referred to that we're working on at the moment, this is how to achieve design quality in disadvantaged communities. Almost all of the case studies are partnerships between public and private, usually led in those cases by the public sector because they're such challenging economic contexts. But in other places, it's maybe the private sector that leads and the public sector that follows, but nevertheless there is a partnership there, and it's about working together and ensuring that the public sector has a very clear set of ambitions, whether they're based on the SDGs or something else, a very clear set of ambitions that say this is our expectation and we're not going to accept anything else. And so it's about establishing what that vision is and establishing that really clearly up front, I think. Oh, there's another one. Yeah, I am Dayu from Pradita University. Usually governance make a target to evaluate every program that already is implemented. If the case is related to design, they usually only focus on aesthetic problems and claims the problem can be solved by making it just beautiful. Can you enlighten how design quality can be evaluated in the right way? That's interesting. Funnily enough, back at home in the UK, we've had our last government, we've just changed government, but our last government were very interested in the question of beautiful development. For years and years, the whole question of what is beautiful development was very much off the agenda, saying that's all just about aesthetics and it's not important. But then we had a series of new politicians who suddenly started arguing that beauty was important as well. A beautiful built environment was important. And I was very skeptical. I was suggesting, no, we shouldn't worry too much about aesthetics. But one of the interesting things that happened was that by emphasizing beauty, in a way, it raised the bar. It became a sort of very high aspiration. Achieving a beautiful place is a very difficult thing to do. It's difficult to measure it as well. But the aspiration was raised, and that sort of ensured that other issues, the sort of more social and environmental and ecological issues, also came along as part of that beauty agenda. And I'm not suggesting that would happen everywhere, but ultimately, I think my view has changed, that I think beauty, aesthetic issues are important, but they're part of a larger agenda. We shouldn't forget them, but they're part and parcel of this large urban design agenda. And it's about tackling the whole in a holistic way, if we possibly can.
Okay. Yeah. Bu Santi, do you want to ask something? Yeah. From still one question from Abi Kurniawan from ITB. Yeah. As we know, many urban spaces. Yeah, okay, thank you. Which one? As we know, yeah.
Yeah, as we know, many urban spaces are losing their meaning,
Yeah,
becoming
okay.
empty and turning into lost spaces, as we often see in cities today. How can urban design governance help bring these lost spaces back to life and prevent them from being neglected again in the future? What key elements should be considered to ensure this regeneration process is successful and lasting? Yeah, I think that's right. We do get these sort of residual spaces in cities all around the world that have, sometimes they just don't have any positive purpose. Sometimes they are neglected and very poor quality as a result. I don't think there's a simple answer to this question. It depends on the nature of the circumstance. It depends on the nature of the space. It depends on ownership. It depends on surrounding uses. It depends on all sorts of complex matters. I think urban design governance tries, wherever it's trying to influence, to put in place a series of processes and a series of mechanisms and tools that can tackle effectively the problems, the different problems. So it may be that in some of those cases, it's all about this sort of those soft influencing powers, and it's about saying to the owners of those spaces, well, could you actually change the nature of those places? Could you turn them around, make them something positive, something that contributes to society rather than just a leftover space? But somewhere else, it may be that it's about, regulation and about using the hard powers and about saying, right, well, in this place, we need pavements, and we shouldn't be giving permission for developments that don't have pavements so that people can walk, even when it's hot. Humans need to be able to walk, and so we shouldn't be giving permission for places that rely solely on cars, for example. And so, different types of regulations and different types of governance tools would be appropriate in different circumstances, but certainly they would potentially have a big impact on this question.
Okay, thank you. Maybe from the lecturers. Yeah, okay. Bu Santi want to ask something? Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Carmona, for the very interesting lecture. I think there are 2 points. Perhaps this is my opinion, and also I want to ask your opinions. In Indonesia, we are consists of many cultures, and some of areas, they have local wisdom. They still hold their culture, and some of them also bringing their local wisdom to how they intervene the built environment, and the local government also sometimes respect and accommodate all of the local wisdom into the regulations. And while the others, the other areas perhaps prefer to adopt something that quite new ideas, perhaps from abroad. So, do you think that with these situations will be also very much influenced to the how to combine in the soft power? And then the second one is, yeah, actually Indonesia also we have some like, yeah, we trying to make good governance, including in urban designs, and you're doing the process, including the evaluations. But I think the weakness is the result, the evaluation result, not as a consideration to the next step. So sometimes we what is it? We have the same a dumb error and so on. So yeah, I think that is two things that perhaps just my opinion, and the first one is I just want to know your opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely phrase, local wisdom. And I think we as professionals need to embrace that local wisdom, and we're foolish if we don't embrace it. Yes, of course, we learn lessons from elsewhere. You know, I've learned a tremendous amount from being here in Indonesia, and I take those lessons back, and those will inform my work. But ultimately, if I or anybody else was involved in a local place, then we should start by understanding those communities and their local wisdom and all that knowledge that they've often built up over generations of how the place works and what they need. And that's where we start. And I think it relates to the question over here as well. And the soft tools are the ideal tools for us to use to capture that, and from there move forward. And that's not to say that innovation is not important, and we should, of course, new technologies comes along and we need to embrace those, and we need to incorporate that. And smart cities was asked about, and sustainable development, and all these agendas we need to embrace, but we need to do it in a way that's sensitive to local communities and to that local wisdom, as you said.
Thank you, because it is actually 11:11. We will maybe we will conclude this lecturing. Yeah, actually, it is not easy because I must read the book first. Yeah, but maybe I try to find several keywords here. Yeah, actually, this is a deep dive in England about not only England, Europe. Yeah, about the urban governance. Yeah, and actually, Europe has a long history in achieve the urban design or place quality. Yeah, since 6,000 before centuries. Yeah. So it's very long. Yeah. Yeah. And related to the meaning of the soft powers means work together. Yeah. So yeah, we must make several action related to the several communities in especially in our country. Yeah, we try to trust. Yeah, we build the trust like this one, and maybe we learn about the what is the power and also the needs of the community, and also maybe related to maybe because most of the student are the student of related to the urban design courses. Yeah, sometimes they feel maybe like guilty. Yeah, if they just make the beautification in the city. Yeah, but actually you already said that we can comes out several problems along with the beauty agenda. Yeah, so we can solve the problem with the beauty agenda. Yeah, so don't be be afraid about that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's enough. Yeah, thank you for your very inspiring lecturing today. Yeah, Okay. And I return the time to the MC. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for our moderator, Dr. Ing Makida Kurniawati, STMT, for hosting such an insightful and fruitful discussion. And we would like to say thank you to Professor Carmona for such an insightful and interesting presentation. I hope this will be very beneficial for all the participants.
So finally, we've arrived at the end of this session. I hope you found the presentation at the lecture are informative and helpful. We'd like to apologize if there's any mistakes from us for our session today. And thank you for your attention and attendance. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, have several courses here, like video. They are still work in the food resilience here.
And I would like to say thank you to all the participants from online session.